my mind catapulted to a new sense of reality, which was that the truth didn't matter, and that I didn't matter, and that the only one who could make sense of my life or make it worth living and who could have any sense of control in a very limited way was myself. Like, that was a huge existential shift for me. And it was very sad. Like, it was becoming an adult is sad. It requires you to reckon with the fact that your life is not going to be the life that you think it should be. It's going to be what it is, and you have to make the best of it. And it might be really unfair, and it might be really sad. And people who have more power than you might punish you and hurt you to justify their own existence. That's just the way it is. And so what do you do about it? And I ask myself that question, like, well, I'm feeling trapped, but I'm not technically trapped. There is a way out. I could just stop existing. And then I had to wake up and ask myself every single morning, is this life worth living? Is it?
From the Free Press, this is Honestly, and I'm Bari Weiss. On November 1st, 2007, a man by the name of Rudy Guede broke into a random home in Perugia, Italy, and then raped and killed Meredith Kercher, a 21-year-old exchange student from Leeds. You might not even remember the names Rudy Guede and Meredith Kercher, but one name I suspect you will is that of Meredith's roommate, Amanda Knox, a 20-year-old exchange student from Seattle. In the weeks and years after Meredith's murder, the media and the prosecutors in Italy concocted a narrative that Amanda, her boyfriend, and Rudy Guede had played a violent sex game, all of which led up to Meredith's brutal murder. Amanda was portrayed as a deviant sex fiend, a slut, a killer, a sociopath, a psychopath, and a cold-blooded murderer. The problem is that none of it was true. Amanda Knox had only been dating her boyfriend, Raffaele, for a week. She had never even met Rudy Guede. Most importantly, she did not murder Meredith Kercher. Amanda would end up spending a total of 8 years on trial and 4 years in prison for a murder she did not commit. Meantime, Meredith's actual murderer, Rudy Guede, would never be fully charged with that crime. He spent 13 years behind bars for a different crime, and upon his release in 2021, he would assault another woman. He's currently on trial for that right now. Now, here's the part of the story most people don't know. On the morning of November 5th, 2007, Amanda Knox was taken into custody in Italy, in a foreign country where she didn't fully speak the language. She wasn't given a lawyer or a translator. She wasn't even told that she was a suspect. She was held for 53 hours without sleep, struck by a police officer, and ultimately pressured into signing a confession. It's been 18 years since she was taken into custody. She's now back in America. She's married, and she also has 2 children. She's recently released a memoir about this whole experience, and it's called Free: My Search for Meaning. It tells the full story of what happened in Perugia, how she fought for her vindication, how the tabloids and credible news organizations villainized her, and it's about what her life has been like since she was exonerated in 2015. Today on Honestly, we talk about all of it. I ask Amanda Knox how she survived prison, how she survived in a world where she felt like the truth didn't matter, how she reintegrated into society, why she returned to Italy of her own accord to confront the prosecutor who put her behind bars, what he said to her about what he thinks about her guilt and her innocence, why she chose forgiveness, and what it truly means to be free. I think this is one of the most meaningful conversations that I've had so far on this podcast. I can't wait for you to listen. Stay with us. Amanda Knox, thank you so much for joining me on Honestly.
Oh, I'm so excited to be here.
Really excited to have you. Okay, so before we get into the case that changed your life and this book that's a reflection in part on that case, I want, if you can, for you to go back in time to 2005, 2006. Go back to the time before you ever stepped foot in Italy. Who was Amanda Knox in 2005 and 2006? What was she like? What did she care about? Who was that person?
Sweet little Amanda Knox from 2005, 2006. So I was just starting college. I grew up in a really close family structure, so really big family, all living close together. I liked to think that, growing up, I felt incredibly well supported by my family, especially my mom, who believed in me and everything. So I really I grew up having nothing bad ever happened to me, really, honestly. I lived in this little bubble. And it's not like my parents were overly protective or anything. I just happened to be a lucky kid. I had very loving parents. I had a very loving family. I was really into, theater and sports, and I just had these broad interests. And so I graduated from high school, 2006. I started going to college, and I decided that I wanted to be a creative writer, but I couldn't convince my dad that that would pay the bills or be worth a college degree. So I told him that I was going to become a translator. And that's why I ended up studying languages. So really just open-minded, free-spirited, very social, very extroverted. And to go from that to the dungeon of my life was a stark shift. And one that I think ultimately, over the course of time, has complicated and deepened my personality, but at the time was at risk of fracturing it. I had a deep faith in humanity. I had a deep trust in people. I was not the type of person to think that if
something bad could happen based on that empathy and openness to the world.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so one of the things that surprised me in advance of this conversation is there's a lot of young people that work in the newsroom here at the Free Press, a lot of people sort of in their early 20s, and a shocking number of people did not know about you or this case. And so before we get to the dungeon, I want to just set up the case itself and the context for it. So correct me if I get any of these details wrong. In September of 2007, you go to Italy. You're 20 years old, and you go for this foreign exchange program. And a few months later, in November, you are arrested for the murder of Meredith Kercher, one of your roommates. The case consumed 18 years of your life. You spent 4 of those years in an Italian prison. And as I mentioned, this case, and I don't know if it was that we're around the same age. I don't know if it was that I was, I'm not a person that's like a murder show kind of woman. But
Neither am I.
I followed this case intensely, and I was extraordinarily interested in you as a person. But an astonishing number of younger people in this office, for example, who are very, very news savvy, did not know this story and were sort of vaguely familiar with your name, but not in the way that it immediately resonates, maybe for millennials and people of our generation. So for their sake, and maybe for the odd alien or two that are tuning in that are above the age of 40 and somehow have been living under a rock for the past 2 decades, tell us, if you could, in brief, or as briefly as you can, without going into all, there's so many details to this story, what happened in November of 2007 to you?
I don't know if you've been following the case up until this point, because obviously it's been 18 years and it's like, good God, how much can we follow this case? But now that you're just mentioning it, that there are a number of young people in your office who don't know all of the details. One of those big details that they probably don't know is who the actual killer is. And they are not alone in that because of how little attention was actually paid to the actual killer, to the extent that the actual killer right now is on trial for sexually assaulting another young woman. And part of the reason for that is because she was of a younger generation. She is in her early 20s. This is her first boyfriend that right? Like, so those are the icky, gross details. Is like after this guy serves just 13 years in prison for, sexually assaulting and murdering my roommate, he gets out and hooks up with this 22-year-old girl who has no idea who he is because no one ever paid attention to him in the case. And then he goes on to, assault and sexually assault this young woman who has never had a boyfriend before. And so those are the things that I think about when I think of the repercussions of how the story was told back then, how it is told today. Anyways,
let's just go one step deeper on that for a second. Most people in America will hear the idea that a person only served 13 years in prison for the cold-blooded murder of an innocent other person and think, how the hell did that happen? Why did this person only serve 13 years? Why was he able to go out and sexually assault and continue to inflict misery on other innocent people in the world?
That is a great question. And I think that goes down to going back into how this case unfolded, which is that, the beginning of November, it's actually 2 days after Halloween, I come home and find that my house has been broken into. I'm trying to get a hold of my roommates. I have 3 roommates. A lot of people don't even know that I had other roommates beyond Meredith. So I'm trying to contact them. I can only get in touch with one of them. So 2 of them are not answering their phone. I get in touch with one of them. She comes and meets me at home. We investigate the house further and we discover, and I call the police. The police arrive. Once the police arrive, we discover Meredith's body in her room. She has been brutally raped, stabbed to death in her own bedroom. And it was utter shock because no one in this small, university town was prepared for a crime of this gravity. And me, just as a person, as a 20-year-old kid who had nothing violent had ever happened in my life. When I thought of preparing for the worst case scenarios of what could happen to me in Italy, I was thinking either I get sick and I need to go to the hospital.
Or pickpocketed.
Yeah, or pickpocket, or I lose my passport because someone pickpockets me. That's what I'm thinking. And so to suddenly be dropped into a scenario where a person that I was just hanging out with and living with is suddenly just gone. And now, all of a sudden, I'm in and out of the police office answering questions to Italian officers, trying to help the investigation. Ultimately, what results is the police get into their mind from the very beginning that the crime isn't what it seems. So what it seems and what it actually is that someone broke into our home. There's evidence of broken windows. Someone is going through the house, and then they attacked and sexually assaulted and murdered my roommate. That's what happened. But from the very beginning, the prosecutor, who in Italy, prosecutors lead police investigations, he believed that that was all actually a cover-up, that something conspiratorial had actually taken place, that it wasn't that someone broke into our home, but someone who had access to the house raped and murdered my roommate and then faked a break-in to make it look like someone who didn't have access to the house had done this crime. So that immediately limits the number of people who could be suspects to a very select few, those of us who had access to the house. And of those who had access to the house, I was the youngest, I was the foreigner, and I was the one who had only one person who could account for my alibi that night, which was my boyfriend. And so the police zeroed in on me very early on. They questioned me for 53 hours over 5 days until they eventually convinced me that every memory that I had of the night what I was actually doing that night was actually my imagination covering up for having witnessed something so traumatizing that I had blacked it out. This is what they were telling me, is that I had repressed my true memories. Everything I thought I knew to be true from that night was all made up. And they pushed me to implicate myself and others in this crime. I was arrested, and along with my boyfriend, who was my alibi, and my boss, who had been texting me the night of the murder. Big announcement in the news, case closed, we have the murderers. It was all this, orgy between Amanda and her boss and her boyfriend, and they were all murdering Meredith all together. Throw us in prison, throw away the key. Well, then the forensic evidence comes back from the crime scene.
Take us back to those 53 hours. You are struck by a police officer. You're gaslit, as you just explained. You don't have a lawyer. You don't have a translator. You barely speak Italian. Like, take us, if you could, just pause on that moment for a minute. You're 20 years old. You're in a foreign country. You don't really speak the language. Like, at what point in those 53 hours do you realize what's happening to you?
That's a really great question, Barry, because I think the surprising response to this is that I didn't realize it even as it was happening.
Right.
Because it was this like slow burn of a process where over the course of many days, I was being lied to and gaslit, but also like the pressure was getting more and more without me like, it wasn't like you just are picked up off the street and suddenly you're in this brutal interrogation scenario. That's not what happened to me. What happened is day by day, I was going in and answering the same questions over and over and over again when questioned by just different police officers. And what they communicated to me was that I was their most important witness, that I was the roommate who was closest to Meredith, that I was one of the last people who saw her, I was the one who came home and found, I've discovered the crime scene. So any little detail that I might remember before it was contaminated by other people coming inside, like all of these things that they were conveying to me was that I was the key to cracking the case. Even though I did not witness this crime, I had no idea who committed this crime. What was communicated to me was that I was utterly necessary for their investigation, and that any little thing that I might remember might be the key to cracking the case. And it then got to the point where after sort of working on me in this way, they started to say to me things like, I don't think maybe you remember correctly what happened that night. Maybe you're confusing it for a different night. Can you try to remember something else that maybe because this is like such a big and overwhelming experience, maybe you are confusing certain things from different days. Can you try to remember what happened that night specifically? And then they would say things like, we know you're lying about something. Like one thing that I did lie about was smoking marijuana. I was afraid that if my surviving roommate specifically told me, we cannot tell the police that we were smoking marijuana in the house, they were going to lose their jobs. They were trying to become lawyers. And so I said, okay, fine. I won't say that we were smoking marijuana in the house. Well, without me knowing it, I didn't know that the boys who lived downstairs from us in the same house were actually growing marijuana in their bathroom. So the idea that none of us were smoking marijuana in the house was obviously a lie. And so they called me out on that lie and they sort of put me on the defensive. They said, you're lying. What else are you lying about? Who are you trying to cover for? So like insinuating in all these little ways, first of all, sort of fracturing my confidence in myself and also fracturing my confidence in my own memories, in my own sanity. And then it just ramped up and up and up because as long as I refused to give them the answers that they wanted to, they just kept getting angrier and angrier and angrier at me until it got to the point that, yes, I was being screamed at. I was being hit in the back of the head. I was being told if I don't tell the truth, I'm never going to see my family again. All of this happening to me in a foreign language that I'm trying to interpret and I'm trying to keep up with and I'm trying to explain myself when I'm utterly handicapped by my limitation of language.
The seed of the prosecution's belief, not in the Occam's razor explanation and the obvious and true one, but in the conspiracy. What is the seed of that? My understanding from the book is it's like the way the window was broken into. And so everything sort of like spiraled out from this initial misconception. Can you just explain a little bit? Because to look at it now, it's like this. It's very, very hard to come up with this, like the Steelman, good faith, generous explanation for why they went to like the crazy orgy explanation rather than the obvious one. If you could, do your best at stepping into the prosecution's shoes. Why was that the thing they were fixated on?
This is a great question, and it is one that I have asked my prosecutor specifically to explain to me because I do not understand. And one of the things we're going to talk about is that in my book, I talk about going and meeting my prosecutor, corresponding with my prosecutor for many years, in part because I wanted to understand how this man had, from the very beginning, convinced himself of some very wrong things, and trying to understand if I could just explain to him, like, look, I know you think that this is I know you think that you are saying these are facts. Like, one of the most infuriating things that I've had when I talk to him about this case is he will say, well, it is a fact that the break-in was staged. And I said, no, that is not a fact. That is not a fact. That is your interpretation of facts. Here are the facts. There was a window that was broken into. There was glass that was found on the floor in the bedroom. There was a rock that was found in the bedroom that was used to break the glass. My prosecutor says that no burglar would ever choose that window in particular to break into the house. He says that an actual burglar would have gone on the other side of the house where there was this balcony and would have climbed up onto the balcony and broken in through that way. So he says to himself, no burglar would ever have chosen that window to break into our house. Therefore,
Orgy.
It is... Therefore, if that is the truth, then logically we can deduce that Amanda's guilty. And if Amanda's guilty of a rape and murder, well, some man has to be involved. Well, we know that she was with her boyfriend, so we know that. But then we get back into this this scenario where the DNA tells another tale about what happened specifically to Meredith in her bedroom that night. And the DNA that was recovered from the crime scene after, that was, recovered in the days leading up to my arrest, but hadn't been analyzed until after my arrest, revealed that it was this local burglar who had a history of breaking and entering, who had a history of aggression towards women. But because they had already arrested and accused me and my boyfriend, they now had to construct a narrative that fit all of us together. And that narrative was, Amanda is in a secret threesome relationship with Raffaele, her actual boyfriend, and this local burglar named Rudy Guede. And they all go back to her house to have some sexy mischief. Meredith comes home and confronts Amanda about her promiscuity. And then Amanda decides to take revenge upon her prudish roommate by forcing her into a murder orgy. That is the logical deduction that ultimately derives from my prosecutor thinking that no burglar would have actually thrown a rock through that window.
One thing I think it's important for people to understand. Your boyfriend at the time,
yes,
Raffaele, you had known him for a week?
A week.
Right. Had you ever met this Rudy Guede in your life?
I did not know him by name. I knew that he played basketball with the boys who lived downstairs from us. So I had seen him in passing, like I had seen many people in passing in this town full of young people. And so I did not know him personally. I did not have a relationship with him. I didn't actually even know his name. He was just one of the various dudes who existed in the area and who happened to play basketball with the boys who lived downstairs from us.
One of the things that I remember being very intensely, almost Talmudically analyzed was this moment where you're standing with Raffaele. I don't know if it's outside of the house or outside of the murder scene. I think it is.
Yeah, it's outside of our house.
Yeah. Basically, the two of you are standing there and it seems almost casual and sort of like you're laughing. And this moment, I have no idea how long it actually lasted. But this is used as proof of your villainy. And there were so many things like that are sort of dredged out from your past, whether it's a nickname you had when you were younger, this Foxy Knoxy thing, or the fact that you had a vibrator, which is like every single 20-year-old American girl that I know. It's all sort of used to construct this total caricature of you. Yeah. And you're telling me it's all based on the choice of a window?
Yes.
You have this line in the book where you're basically like, I'm innocent. This is going to work out. My mom's going to get here. And everyone's going to understand this is a big misunderstanding and it's all going to be fine. But it's not all fine. You spend a year in prison awaiting trial, and then you are convicted for a crime you did not commit. And you are forced to come to terms with the idea, and this was at the time, that you were about to spend 26 years of your life in prison. You're 22 years old when you're convicted. Take us back to maybe the moment of the conviction and then the time right after when you're having to sort of look down the reality of 26 years in a dungeon for something you never did.
I think that moment was the moment that I grew up very fast, just like immediately. Because you're right, like leading up to that verdict, I was still in that like very interesting in-between space mentally where you're technically an adult, but you're still a kid because you believe that the adults are going to come into the room and fix things, right? Like that if you just sort of hang tight, the people who are in charge are going to do the right thing. And so, yes, like even in the face of just insane things said about me in the press and in trial, my prosecutor telling the jury that I was torturing and taunting Meredith before stabbing her to death, like all of that was just this insane fantasy, this pornographic fantasy that had been constructed in order to justify having arrested me in the first place. And I had this deep faith because I was young and I was naive and I was still not quite an adult, thinking that the adults in the room were going to fix it and that I would get to, like, when it all came down to it, I would get to go home. And then to have that moment of realization that there are no adults in the room. We're all just children yelling at each other. And I'm the one who now has to pay for someone else's crime because of someone else's fantasy. Like that shift in my mind of like suddenly realizing that there was nothing I could lean on. There was no safety net for me. I was in free fall. And it was only me. Like the only one who could make it okay for me was me. That was my moment of growing up. Or as my friend in prison, Don Salo, the priest, he said that I grew up, I aged 40 years in 4. Because it would, like, especially in that moment, I just, my mind catapulted to a new sense of reality, which was that the truth didn't matter and that I didn't matter and that the only one who could make sense of my life or make it worth living and who could have any sense of control in a very limited way was myself. Like that was a huge existential shift for me. And it was very sad. Like it was becoming an adult is sad. It requires you to reckon with the fact that your life is not going to be the life that you think it should be. It's going to be what it is, and you have to make the best of it. And it might be really unfair, and it might be really sad. And people who have more power than you might punish you and hurt you to justify their own existence. That's just the way it is. And so what do you do about it? And I ask myself that question, like, well, I'm feeling trapped, but I'm not technically trapped. There is a way out. I could just stop existing. And then I had to wake up and ask myself every single morning, is this life worth living? Is it? And as a 22-year-old kid who, again, nothing bad had ever happened to me, the the things that go through your mind, like I had crazy thoughts like, oh, maybe all of the bad things are just happening to me all at once. Like maybe instead of like normal people getting zits over the course of their life, maybe I just get like one gigantic zit that like consumes me. You know, like what is happening is just all the bad things happening to me all at once, and then my life is over. Is that what this is? Or, and I really, I really feel like I'm a very lucky person to be constitutionally this way. Or is there something on the other side of this? Is there something through this that I need to discover that is valuable and that I can't see clearly at this moment? But if I'm just curious enough to endure, am I going to find something on the other side of that endurance that makes life worth living?
I think if I felt like I was in free fall, like I didn't matter, and that maybe most devastatingly of all, the truth didn't matter, I don't know what I would anchor onto. What did you end up kind of anchoring onto that allowed you to answer that question in the affirmative, my life is worth living? Because you write very vulnerably in the book that you're put on suicide watch at first, and you consider that. What takes you out of that pit?
You know, there are two big relationships that are through lines in my book, and one is my prosecutor, and one is my mom. And my mom, because she was the one, I believe, who primarily instilled in me a deep knowledge that I mattered. Like, I am so lucky to have never, ever felt a question that my life didn't matter, at least to my mom. And because of that like deep, deep knowledge that I mattered, because of her, I mattered to myself. And because I mattered to myself, a rebellious part of me was like, okay, fine. You've taken away my freedom. You've taken away my, opportunities in life, but you can't take everything. You can't. The only person who can take everything from me is me. And so I latched on to what I could control and what I did and what they couldn't take from me, which was how I was going to spend the time that I was losing and what I was going to get out of my life. And it's an interesting shift in perspective because it's not exactly a happy one. And I describe the feeling, like there was a physical sensation that came along with this realization, which was cold. Like I was like this, like a chill of realization swept through me, hair standing up on the back of my neck, like, oh, this is on me. Like I have to make this work in defiance of them because they're trying to convince me that my life doesn't matter. They're throwing me away in a dungeon and throwing away the key, completely, misrepresenting and rewriting my past, my present, and my future. A little bit of part of me was like, fuck that. I don't know if I'm allowed to say that, but
of course
fuck
you
that. Like, fuck them. Like, they can't take my life from me. And so I made an important shift in my brain, which was I stopped waiting to get back the life that I should have been living. And I started looking around me with a more clear eye at the life that I had available to me. And I tried to think, what can I possibly do within these set of limitations that is meaningful to me? And I noticed pretty early on that I actually was very well equipped for that. I was educated. I had learned Italian over the course of 2 years in prison. and I could read and write. And so many of the women that I was imprisoned with were either foreigners who couldn't speak Italian, or they were Italians who couldn't read and write because they were from a completely different world than I was. And so I became the unofficial translator and the unofficial scribe of the prison, where I was just like shipped around to other people's rooms to help them write their letters for them, read their documents, help them talk to the doctor and explain their ailments. And it became a very meaningful existence that also made my life within the prison environment easier. But that said, that was 4 years of my life, and it wasn't 26. And I don't know what 26 years would have looked like for me. And if I would have, I don't know. I like to think that I'm always a person who finds something, some opportunity, some nugget of value in struggle. But I don't romanticize rock bottom. I don't think that struggle necessarily leads to character development, right? Like I saw many people around me in the prison be utterly broken by the bad things that had happened to them. And I think my greatest fear was becoming like them, was being broken by it. Mm. And so there was this sense of resistance in me, but I didn't know how hard I could be. And I didn't know how long I could endure. What I discovered about myself is that I can endure quite a bit, and that's a great, thing to know about yourself. But I don't know. They could have been worse, and I suppose I'm grateful that it wasn't worse than it was.
Well, so you had told your dad that the respectable job was to learn to be a translator, and it's strange that you sort of de facto end up doing that.
Yeah, be careful what you wish for.
Right. You wind up translating Harry Potter in your cell. You write about sort of like not understanding all of the social dynamics at first. There's the Italians, the Nigerians, the Romani, but you kind of become the de facto translator in prison between these groups. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Oh, gosh, you want to talk about my girls? Okay. So my nickname in the prison was America. And it's interesting. The way that the prison got to know me wasn't actually face-to-face. I was in isolation for the first 8 months, so I wasn't actually allowed to interact with other prisoners for 8 months. So what I did, because I was, alone a lot of the time, was I sang to myself. I was just, alone, singing to myself to comfort myself, a lot of Beatles songs, and people would hear me. And over the course of time, they started shouting requests to me like I was this little jukebox because I technically wasn't allowed to talk to anyone, but there wasn't any prohibition against singing. So my first interactions with the other prisoners were them saying, sing that one that goes la, 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 and whatever, and then I would sing that song. And I wasn't allowed to talk to any of them. But then I was finally, after 8 months, put into Gen Pop, and I was immersed in a world that was very, very different than anything that I had ever known. It was very cliquish, especially along ethnic lines. And there was a lot of desperation. There was a lot of impulsive behavior. There was a lot of people who were struggling with drug addiction. These are people who have like deep problems. But also there was a lot of sense of camaraderie. Like, we're all in this together. We're all suffering through it together. I did notice that there was faith played an interesting role. I mean, I think faith plays a very interesting role in prisons in general because it's a it's, you have a captured audience for ideology. And so it's a very easy place to sort of impose ideology on a captive audience, literally. But a lot of people rationalized their own imprisonment, I found, as the better thing that could happen to them than something worse. So,
wow.
Especially the Nigerian women I met would say that God had imprisoned them to protect them from some horrible, violence that would have been committed against them had they not gone to prison, and they were protected in the prison. So I found that was really interesting and an interesting coping strategy. Of course, there were other people who were not coping so well, who were either having to take, heavy doses of antidepressants just to get through the day, and they were very zombie-like, or those who were struggling with a lot of anger, and so were impulsive and violent towards others. It was an environment where one had to be hyper vigilant. But as soon as you learned your prison hustle, which I talk about in terms of ikigai in the book, where that sort of intersection between your interests and your talents and the community's need, all of these things come together, and you discover what your purpose is within a space. And my purpose, once that became very clear to myself and to the women around me, suddenly I was a very highly valued member of my tribe, and I no longer ever had to worry about someone sneaking up on me and, with glue in their hands to try to rip out my hair, because other people were looking out for me. It's a different world where the stakes are heightened, where emotions are heightened because of the punitive environment itself. But it also is a simplified existence, right? You are not distracted necessarily in the way that we are in the world that is constantly demanding our attention. In prison, nobody's demanding your attention, right? You're just there to sit there and lose your life until they let you out again. And so there's nothing technically you have to do. So instead, it was trying to make the most of that time on your own terms within a set of limitations.
As people will now have gathered, you yourself are not religious, but you develop a close relationship with the prison chaplain. And he says this to you: if you pray for strength, God doesn't give you strength. He gives you the opportunity to be strong. And you write about him in a very beautiful way, explaining how he sort of becomes your best friend in this place. Tell us about this person.
I've never been a religious person, but I've always been a thoughtful, philosophical person. And the man of Don Saulo, who is this Catholic priest, he was in his 70s when I first met him. He is a very thoughtful, very philosophical priest. Also a very emotional person. One of my favorite memories of him is he would bring in movies for us to watch, and he brought in Kung Fu Panda once and was just sobbing at the end of Kung Fu Panda, which is such my person. I love that about him. And he first encountered me through music. He heard me singing, and as someone who is a musician himself, he plays the organ. That's an interest for him. His way of bridging the gap with me was offering me the opportunity to play music in his office under the guise of going to confession. So I was, a few times a week, I was allowed to practice playing Beatles songs in his office. And then he invited me to come play music during Mass. And then over the course of time, that time where I'm in his office with him and he's helping me learn how to play the piano, we also are talking about just being people, being humans, philosophizing about life, talking about how do we make sense of the fact that life isn't fair. And I, butted heads with him a lot over this idea that there's, God has a grand plan that we only get to really appreciate once we're dead, all of that kind of thing. We just have to have faith that somebody, this idea that we have to have faith that some adult in the room is going to make things better. That did not work out for me anymore. Instead, what did resonate for me was when he again spoke to how a shift in perspective can turn a problem into a puzzle, or a devastating crisis into an opportunity. And all that took, it didn't mean that you had to have faith that somebody else had a plan for you. What it required is your own sense of creativity, your own sense of having an open mind to existence, and finding the means to accept what you, like that age-old wisdom, accept what you cannot control, and then control what you can, which has been like such an important thing for me to realize just in life in general, because it means that I'm not wasting my time and my energy on things that I know that I can't control. Like I have very, very strong visceral like knowledge about what is a locked door for me and what is a window that I can open, you know? And that has been incredibly helpful for me in life, because understanding that limitation has made me a more effective person in my life, both in the prison environment and in freedom. Because I think one of the things that I realized upon being returned to freedom that I had a complicated idea about what it meant to be free. And are we free in freedom? What does it mean to be free? Does it mean that we get to do whatever we want? Does it mean that we get to live the life that we should have lived? No. So what does it mean? How do you enact, how do you embody freedom in a way that is meaningful to you, given the fact that we're not free? We don't have the ability to do everything we want. We don't have the ability to receive everything, to get what we deserve. So given that knowledge, given like realizing that is a locked door, that is a closed door that I cannot open, what is within the realm of possibility for me? What can I do that says something about who I am? I think there's an important relationship between doing and being, and recognizing that what we do is what we become. And so really like thinking about that and like, am I in this moment doing what I want to become? Because it's going to do that to me anyway, and just being really mindful of that.
So one of the things you write about in the book is sort of your desperation for Don Saulo to believe you. And like on the first day that you're in custody, he visits you for the first time and you're kind of begging him to believe you. And he simply says, "I believe you're sincere." Yeah. And that is not what you want to hear.
That was devastating. So part of that growth of my relationship with Don Saulo was, after having been, screamed at and hit by police officers and then thrown in prison, I was desperate for some adult figure to like have my back. Like I wanted my mom, but I couldn't have my mom. And so here was this person who approached me who was you can see from just like a mile away that he is a kind person. He is an honest person. He is not a person who is going to inflict punishment on you. Like he's a very like, he's just a nice guy, like I could see that. And so when I finally, put myself out there in this moment of having, just still reeling from having been gaslit and physically abused and psychologically manipulated, like I'm coming out of that hysteria and trying to say, please, like, can someone believe me? No one believes me. And I go to this man, this nice man, and I say, I'm innocent. Like I didn't do the thing that they're accusing me of. I don't understand why I'm here. Do you believe me? I just needed someone in that moment to believe me. And of course, he had a choice in that moment as a nice man. He could have lied to me and said, of course I believe you. But he didn't know me. He didn't know anything about the case. He didn't know that I was innocent. And so that would have been a lie. So instead, what he said to me was the truth, which was he was looking at me in the eye and could tell that I was being honest with him. But am I crazy? Am I out of my mind? Like, he doesn't know. So he tells me what he knows, which is that he believes that I am sincere. And I was heartbroken because once again, it felt like I was in this state of like nothing I said and nothing I did mattered, that I couldn't even defend myself because no one believed me. And I was crushed. But over time, I came to appreciate Don Saulo's, I wouldn't call it brutal honesty, but I would call it his dedication to honesty. Like, it's not brutal because he was not brutal to me.
But it makes that moment sort of makes the moment that happens 4 years later on the day of your appeal hearing. Don Saulo says to you, I believe you're innocent, and I know you're going to go home. And that was before the verdict had come in. What did those words mean to you?
I didn't know that already he had realized that I was innocent a long time before. And he told me this afterwards. But apparently, Perugia is a small town, and he knew my prosecutor personally. He was older than my prosecutor, so he had seen my prosecutor grow up and knew him in a deep, deep way. And every morning on his way to the prison, Don Saulo would stop by the same cafe to get an espresso, the same one that my prosecutor would go to. And they would encounter each other every morning. And at a certain point in my imprisonment, Don Saulo would just, with a sort of mischievous nudge, say to my prosecutor, she's innocent, right? And he would just be sort of like kindly just dropping that seed every day. And then we would be coming to the prison and not telling me a word about that. But yeah, like when I sat down with him, well, first of all, that final day that I was waiting for my verdict, I had a choice. I could either wait while the jury deliberated in a cell, underground beneath the courthouse, or I could go back to the prison. And I did not want to wait in a cell alone. I wanted to go and spend time with Don Saulo because he had become my friend and my confidant. And so he set aside all of his work for that entire day just so that he could stay in his office with me. And we talked a lot. I talked with him about his upbringing in the church. He had been on the track to become a priest since he was 7 years old. And I thought, oh my God, isn't that lonely? And he asked me to play music for him. And it was in that moment when he asked me to play music for him that he sort of laid the cards on the table, because he brought out this little recording device and said, I need to record you singing because I think this is the last time I'm going to hear your voice. I know you're going home because I know you're innocent. And he wasn't lying to me. He wasn't being, sugarcoating. He was telling me what he believed to be true. And I was afraid to hope at that point, but it meant so much to me that he knew me. Like, he saw the real me. I wasn't the girl accused of murder. I wasn't Foxy Noxy. I wasn't Luciferina. For him, I was me. I was Amanda. And there are like very few people in my life, even to this day, for which I am simply Amanda, right? Because like from the beginning of this, I became an idea in people's minds. I became the face and the name of a lot of people's fantasies. And, one of the things that I wrote about most recently in a Substack that just came out today, actually, so it's top of mind, was I became a sexual fantasy. Like, it wasn't just a fantasy of violence. Yes. It was a sexual fantasy. It was a pornographic fantasy. It was like who I was diminished into, somebody's like very macabre jerk-off session. Like that's what it ultimately came down to. And it was so gross, this like sexual trauma that I was also imposed upon me. And like, I know, and that's like sort of complicated my existence in the world as a woman who, who's come out, who's still, young and wanting to, fall in love and have a life. Like, how do you do that once you get out of prison when you've been vilified as a sexual demon for your entire adult life? Like, what do you do? And so just the fact that like, for him, I was none of those fantasies. And certainly none of those pornographic ones. Like, I felt so safe and I felt so seen. And what a gift in a world where we are so prone to judgment, to projecting our fantasies onto others, to scapegoating, to putting people into little boxes. It's an insane, beautiful gift. And it's ultimately the gift that I felt like I wanted to give back because it was the one that was the most meaningful to me. And, we have so much to cover because like my book covers a lot, and a lot of it is about what comes after this moment, which is like, okay, now that you're in freedom, how do you be a person again when you are still, when the worst experience of your life defines your existence in the public arena? How do you wrap your mind around your own freedom and your own in the limitations of that freedom? How do you regain a sense of agency when you repeatedly over years you've been told that nothing you say and nothing you do matters because it is always going to be viewed in the worst possible light? Like, those were the things that I was grappling with in my mid-20s. Like, my 20s were, I think everyone is going through a developmental stage where they experience little existential crises, but I felt like my version of it was just so extreme. And it ultimately resulted in me making this gesture of reaching out, first of all, me making a lot of mistakes. And I talk about those in the book because it's really important to me to describe how like even the regaining of a sense of like stability in the world is itself a kind of free fall where you're like, oh, wait, does the truth matter? And do I matter to people? I don't know. What can I push? What can I lean on? Like that, because your whole sense of what the world, like what is stable and reliable about the world has been so shaken and shattered, that invitation to participate in the world again is so tantalizing and yet so dangerous because you don't know who you can trust. You don't know what you can trust. And so you're sort of flailing and trying to hold on to something. And sometimes you grapple with the wrong thing. I trusted the wrong people. I had bad things happen to me even after I got out of prison. And then it all sort of came back to finding myself, and in the finding myself, discovering what was still haunting me and discovering what it was, not just what I needed from the world, but what I had to give. And specifically to like this man who had taken away my freedom and had utterly disrupted my life.
Let's just spend a beat just on the media portrayal of you, because one of the things you learn from the book is during the 4 years that you're in prison, like you only are catching a glimpse of what the rest of us are seeing. And just the like wall-to-wall aspect of this. I mean, it is, I just remember it being sort of just everywhere and like completely ubiquitous.
Yeah.
And it's only after your release that you sort of understand the full scope of it. Meredith is sort of the innocent virgin, you as, well, all of the things that we've been talking about. perhaps you can see it now in hindsight, and I look at other things from the culture of that moment. It was a very different time. The early-ish 2000s, and you think about like how the Monica Lewinsky story might have played out differently today, how the Britney Spears story might have played out differently today. Like, what do you think was going on more broadly in the culture at that moment that allowed for the press to do to you what they did?
Yeah. I mean, this was before Me Too, first of all. So I think that the way that women's experience of their own sexuality and the traumas that can result from that sexuality was not as openly discussed at the time. I do think that, again, that pornographic fantasy, that stereotyping of women into either the uptight virgins or the violent whores, like manipulative, cunning, vengeance-seeking whores. Like that's that dichotomy that was presented here. I think that reducing women, especially diminishing or punishing women for their sexuality, was something that was very openly done. I remember there was one writer who wrote an article that I read after I got out of prison, and her article was, "Where are all the feminists in the Amanda Knox case? Like, why have we all just subscribed to this obvious, male fantasy of women on women crime, which is, and not just women on women crime, but women on women sexual crime." Like, I think one of the things that is most heinous about the fantasy that was constructed in this case in particular was how it took a man's crime. A man raped and murdered my roommate, and instead warped it into this woman-on-woman crime where two women who represent two sexual ideals come into contact with each other and it results in murder. Like, that's how it was represented. And it's this pitting. Honestly, though, like, I have to say, I feel like the pitting of women against other women is still very topical and compelling today.
I guess I wonder if you say to yourself, like, oh, like, I know why they did this. This sells papers. Like,
yes, yeah.
This is good business. The notion of me as this caricature of Foxy Knoxy or whatever that I don't even recognize, it's good business.
It's good business also because I think the thing that, and you're right, like from the top, you were mentioning that there is this like deep interest in unraveling the truth behind this face, right? Like, there was something about me looking like the young girl next door, the obviously innocent one, but the fact that I was accused of such a heinous crime invited people to feel entitled to scrutinize every single moment and detail or fantasy about me, to construct narratives about me, because I was just this like perfect slate. I complicate. Yeah.
But it was
Go
also
ahead.
because you were gorgeous and are gorgeous. But you when you're 21 years old and you look like that.
I mean, I look back on my 20-year-old, like those pictures from back in the day, and I think I look like a child. So I also come away feeling like the world is just so pervy. But yes, like I was a pretty girl. I was a girl, though. And I think that I was not a woman. I was not sophisticated. I wouldn't even say that I was beautiful. I was a cute girl. and the idea that a cute girl could be involved in violent sex was just clickbait, porn bait, deep, deep instinctual bait for people's like ravenous, like this like deep, there was a ravenous appetite for this story that took hold and just completely obliterated any interest in the truth. And, you see that to this day, because again, like if people really, really genuinely cared about the truth of what happened to Meredith, they would have paid attention to all of the facts about the actual person who demonstrably was proven to have committed this crime. And they would be paying attention to the fact that he's now on trial again. And you just don't see that because the interest became not necessarily in what happened to the victim, but what is all about this like beautiful, innocent looking sex demon. Like that was the story.
Gonzalo's right. You do win your appeal. And you leave prison after 4 years. And finally, you are free. And yet what this book describes and what we've sort of been circling around in this conversation is you go from being confined in an Italian prison cell to being confined in what is supposed to be freedom. Explain that a little bit.
Yeah. So I'm the girl accused of murder. My entire life now is defined in a very big way by the most horrible thing that happened to me that became very public, and the interest for which does not go away. Like my situation was not that when the story was over and when the trials were over, people lost interest in me. Years go by and I'm trying to get married and have a private ceremony, and paparazzi are outside of, the location because they've tricked some people into conveying where it is. And I'm having to navigate like being this object of macabre interest and being this representing to this day a version of femininity and humanity that is ugly, that is condemnable. As I am navigating trying to have a life that is meaningful and that where I can be a valuable member of society, when I am just written off as tabloid trash or as a psychopath who got away with murder, I am feeling like there is no place for me and that I don't have that humanity has written me off, and therefore I have no possibility to be one of us, to have a stake in where we're all going in this world. And yet at the same time, because I have like this experience and these deep sensitivities and this philosophical processing that I'm doing, I'm noticing things about the world that other people aren't noticing. And so I start writing about it, and I start regaining a sense of my own voice and my own sense of purpose, stumbling along the way. But I'm still haunted by the fact that my life, in a way, has been taken from me and can never be given back to me by the person who threw me in jail.
And tell us his name.
His name's Giuliano Mignini.
This, to me, is like the most, I think, astonishing part of this book and just your story, which is so you win your appeal in 2011. You're finally acquitted in 2015. And then in 2019, I probably would never, ever, ever go back to Italy. But you go back to Italy for the first time since your release to speak at a conference for the Italian Innocence Project. Mm-hmm. And the man who's the boogeyman, who puts you behind bars, this prosecutor, Giuliano Mignini, sees your speech. Now, prior to this, you had sent him 2 letters. You don't hear a response, but he sees this speech and responds to you.
Yes.
What does he say?
So in my overtures first to him, I said that I wanted to meet him face to face. I wanted to encounter him outside of the adversarial justice system because I felt like he was incapable of seeing who I really was. He was unable to see me and understand who he was accusing because we had encountered each other in this very like high tension, fraught, adversarial scenario. And so I thought if I could just, do that like 2 minutes of staring into the eye and like seeing the soul of the other human being, maybe he would realize that I'm innocent. Like maybe if he just talked to me, he would realize. And then, the fantasy spirals out of control. And I think, and then maybe he'll tell the world that I'm innocent. And then everyone will be finally nice to me. Like maybe that'll happen. And so, of course, I'm like, doing this like desperate hoping, wishing. What if I could convince this man? If I could just convince him that he was wrong about me, maybe that would give me a sense of peace. And at first, he says that he's unable to meet with me in person because he's still an acting prosecutor. But also the pandemic very shortly comes thereafter, and we can't see each other anyway. But here we are. Now we have this correspondence going, and I start saying, okay, well, if I can't see you in person, can we get to know each other? Can we find common ground even just through the act of correspondence? And I really approached him not from a like, what the fuck is wrong with you sort of way, but more in a sense of like, help me understand you kind of way. Like, I'm not here to condemn you. I'm not here to judge you. I want to understand. And I want to know you. I told him, like, you to me are this nightmarish figure, but I know that that's not fair to you in the same way that the nightmarish version of me out there is not fair to me. So you tell me who you are.
What is it about you? I think most people would say, I'm out. Like, I am going as I'm compartmentalizing and putting this as far in my past as is humanly possible. You decide, Amanda, to have a correspondence with this man. And then in June of 2022, you meet face to face with him in Italy at a private meeting mediated by Donsalo, your prison chaplain. And everyone in your life is saying basically versions of, are you absolutely batshit out of your mind? Insane.
Do you have Stockholm syndrome?
Right.
How could you trust this man? Of course, yeah.
What were you seeking? Do you think it was the feeling that you got from Don Saulo of knowing you as Amanda? Was it the knowing? What was it?
Well, it changed. So interestingly, over the course of our correspondence, and this is, my husband was so great about this. He was always supportive of me, but he was also challenging me in just the right way. Like he would sort of surprise me around the house and say, why are you doing this? And I would have to give an answer. And sometimes my answer would be, I want to know if the person who hurt me knows that they hurt me and cares. Or I want to see if he can realize that I'm innocent. Or, like there was always a new sort of question. But then I realized over the course of time, and as we were getting closer and closer to this actual in-person meeting, he, retires, the pandemic wanes, I buy a plane ticket. I'm suddenly like forced to ask myself, why am I doing this? And I realized that if I am setting out in order to get him to admit something to me, that's me focusing on a door that I can't open. That's the door that is locked to me. I don't have control over that. So if that is my goal, then I am doomed to fail. And instead, I ask myself, is there something in me that I have in me that is driving this? Is there something not that I can receive from this man, but that I can give him? And I realized that it was very much that thing that Don Salo had given me, that ability to see me clearly and to recognize me for the person that I really am. And like at this point in my life and in my correspondence with the person who now was Giuliano in my mind, instead of Dr. Mignini, he was Giuliano. I could see him clearly, which did not mean letting him off the hook for what he had done for me or done to me, but it was accepting that where he was at, who he was, what he was influenced by, how he thought he was the hero of his own story, and he still believes he is the hero of his own story, and he still believes in the actions that he took because he believed in them. Like he honestly
Does he believe you are guilty now?
It depends on who asks him and when. But what he says now and what he is willing to publicly admit now is that I'm not the person that he thought he was prosecuting. and that he cannot imagine me as being capable of committing the crime that he accused me of. What he says to me privately,
yes,
I promised I would not say, but what I'll say is it's more than that. So, yeah, I mean, he's in this crisis moment, and I feel for him because I think he's a man who got caught up in his own story, and unraveling that story it causes him to question himself and his role in the world, his role as the hero. And that's a huge psychological cost for him. And I'm trying to encourage him to remember that he can always start again, begin again. He can always be the investigator that he has always wanted to be. He can continue reflecting on this case and do so with a more mature and less biased mind, more mature and more informed mind, let's say. And that's what he's doing. He's not a man. He's not someone that's stuck in amber. He, like every one of us, is a process. And I'm willing to accept his process while also not letting him off the hook, you know?
Okay, so Amanda, if you could, I would love for you to read on page 246 of your book. And it's basically what you said to your prosecutor on that day in Italy. And it starts with, I want you to know that I'm innocent.
I want you to know that I am innocent. I had nothing to do with Meredith's murder. You were wrong about me. I was treated as if I was guilty until and unless I could convince you and your colleagues of my innocence. And I failed to do that. But I am not here to convince you of my innocence. I'm here to let you know that whether you've realized your mistake or not, I do not think you are an evil person. Your mistake, which caused great harm to me and my loved ones, and to Raffaele and his loved ones, is not the only thing that defines you. I want you to know that despite the fact that I am still hurt today, I am grateful for my experience, in which you played an important and influential role. I am grateful because I learned things about myself that I never would have known, both how weak and vulnerable I am, but also how strong. I am a very strong person. I know that in large part because of you. This experience crystallized for me my core values: curiosity, compassion, and courage. Curiosity for the truth, not just the version that most serves me. Compassion, especially for those who have made mistakes. And courage to overcome my own fears and pain in order to remain curious and compassionate towards others, especially those who have harmed me. We cannot change the past, but we can change the future. And the mistakes of our past are the opportunities of our future. It is never too late to live up to our values, and I believe you are a person of value. I do not wish you ill. I wish you peace.
I just found it so remarkable reading that and hearing it again now, that you were able, just based on the conversation we've had today, of being in the pit, feeling unmoored from any sense of morality, safety, any semblance of the truth mattering, to get to a place where you're able to look the person that threw you into the pit and say this to him. And I wonder, I know you're not religious, but there's something almost profoundly, I don't know if it's Stoicism or Buddhism, but there is a value system coursing through this that is transcendent, I think, that has some level of transcendence. What do you call that thing?
Yeah, you're right. Like, there is a spirituality to it.
Yes.
And I think that it is correct to describe it that way, because my own journey has sort of evolved from the philosophical to the spiritual, like from that deep sense of knowing and deep sense of interconnectedness, and how like recognizing in that spiritual way, how we are all interconnected, and how just as like he is a deep influence on me, I am a deep influence on him, and recognizing my own power in that. Like I woke up that morning, in the entire lead up to that meeting, I was utterly terrified. And I was also unsure of what I was going to say. And then that morning I woke up and I just knew. And I felt unstoppable. In the way that like the Taoists would say that I was like flowing in sync with the universe in that moment. Like I was unstoppable. And, I wish upon people moments in their lives when they could feel how I felt in that moment, because I have never felt more free than when I was able to like relinquish so much of what was holding me back, which was that hurt and that pain and that anger and that hatred for this human being, and instead embrace the sort of broader self that he is and that he represents, and that also the smallness of him. Like in that moment, like how do you respond to something like that? Like when someone says something to you like that, like he became like a baby bird in my hands. Suddenly the entire power between us shifted.
That's what I was thinking. It's like the polarity has completely reversed in that moment.
Yep.
And but it's not like the power went away. You are holding the power. How did it feel to hold the power?
I felt like a superhero. I felt like I had finally accomplished something that was like the definition of who I was. Like in my entire adult life, I had been defined by this thing that I didn't do. And finally, I'd like done something that wasn't just a reaction to what was happening to me. It wasn't just an act of survival. I did not need to go back to Italy to sit down across from my prosecutor and say these words to him. That was something that I manifested that said something about who I was. He came away from that experience using the language of his own spirituality to describe what he felt, which was that he had experienced an act of grace. That's what he called it. And, as much as he is a very defensive, self-justifying person, he also recognizes that what I did was justified in like it wouldn't be grace unless I was justified in having those feelings.
Well, that's
him.
the point. Implicit in the idea that it was an act of grace is that he did something wrong, or put in another language, that he has sinned.
Right.
Was that acknowledged?
So Giuliano is, I think, like many people, in fact, all people, I think that, and this is something that I acknowledged to him in this moment, was that in the moment when he was doing the wrong thing, he thought he was doing the right thing. Mm-hmm. And so I never accused him of intentional malice towards me. And I think that he appreciated the fact that I was willing to give him that benefit of the doubt when he had like recognizably denied me that benefit of the doubt. And I think that is where he, again, was able to convey to me, oh my gosh, you are really, truly not the person that I thought I was prosecuting, which is to say that I'm, the person that he thought he was prosecuting was someone who would viciously stab to death a female roommate because I was PMSing, listening to too much Fiona Apple, like what is it? like what? Based on nothing, So that's, and I think he's, again, like I said, he's still a man who is processing. He is not, like, he didn't just come away from that experience enlightened. It wasn't, like he sat, these, Buddhist stories where they the master talks to the monk and he has his moment of like ninja enlightenment. Like that's not what happened to him in that moment. But I think what he experienced was something that he felt was like a spiritual communion. And he has been processing that spiritual communion for years now. And, you know, he still texts me to this day. He sent me an email this morning. Like
saying
so,
what?
Still processing what our relationship means to him, and how it has caused him to evolve, not just his thinking about the case, but his thinking about his legacy and his role in the world. He is very, I think, like many men, very concerned about his legacy and wanting to leave an impact that is ultimately healing instead of hurtful. And he wants to be, he describes it sometimes to me like he wants to be the one who pulls the thorn out of my foot. And
well, he can do that.
I know. I know. And what he says to himself is he needs to convince himself of what the truth of what happened is, and he's still trying to figure that out, is what he's telling me.
Do you forgive him?
You know, I did not set out to forgive him. That was not it wasn't part of my like spiritual journey. It wasn't one of my goals. But I do think that once you really see a person, like really see them, really understand them in all of their like naked flaws, you'd have to be a very cruel and unusual person to not feel compassion for them. And I feel an immense amount of compassion for this man. I care about him, and I worry about him, and I try, like, becoming a mom has really helped me in this regard. Like, I can set a boundary while also maintaining this sort of unconditional, like, loving support of this human being who is a flawed human being in a difficult world. Like, I can be all of those things at once. I can set a boundary and hold him gracefully. Does that mean that I still don't have my own struggles with like anger or frustration or disappointment? No, like those are all things that I still experience because I haven't gotten the apology that I deserve.
You haven't gotten the apology you deserve. And I guess the sense of entrapment that you felt when you were first released, and it's like, wait, I'm out of the cell, but I'm in the prison, and that prison is my life and the caricature and the perception of me. At this point, in July of 2025, do you still feel that way? Do you still feel like you have to prove your innocence?
Yes, and in the sense that I think this is true of anybody who has been wrongly accused, is that you feel like you're going to spend the rest of your life proving your innocence. But at the same time, I do not feel limited by that. And I think that's the crux of the issue, is that I felt limited by this accusation, by this having to prove my innocence. And now I feel informed by it. I feel almost uplifted, platformed by it. Like I literally have a basis upon which to ground my own philosophy and my own approach to life and my own work and my own value system. All of that has deep roots in what is ultimately become a very deep and dark fertilizer. Like it is the stuff of life that I have grappled with and that I have processed and that I have like churned through my being, that I now feel deeply, deeply informed by, and as a result of that, deeply confident in.
You talked earlier in this conversation about the sadness of growing up and realizing that there's no like secret adults table, and realizing the real chaos and the upside down quality that life can sometimes have and the unfairness of it. I guess I wonder if you're still sitting in that reality or if a different one has emerged. You know, a lot has happened to you since then. You've gotten married, you have 2 children, you're the author several times over, you have a podcast, you're a public personality, you're extremely involved in organizations that work with falsely accused and also with other people that have gotten out of prison. Like, has your perception, like that sort of shock, that cold reality you experienced of like, wait, like things are not sunshine and daisies. Actually, it's more like the opposite. That despair and the coldness of that despair, which I felt physically as you were describing it, has that shifted in you?
The abyss never goes away, does it? Once you've seen into that abyss, you always feel like you're walking on a tightrope. And, you know, the thing that I'm still sort of working out, whether or not this is okay or not, is that now when I experience joy, I don't just experience joy. I experience grief alongside joy, because I am very aware of how fragile and impermanent everything is. And I think the only time, like my meditation practice has really helped me to like sit with this paradox of being okay, like being good, being even happy with the knowledge that everything you love will ultimately be taken away from you, that everything that you are will ultimately crumble. And that's okay. That's even good, because what it means is that the having it now means so much. Like, I do not take anything for granted. I do not, you know, like these moments that I get to have with my children, I'm not going to have them forever. So like, and like, there's no guarantee to any of it. So the fact that like I have happy and healthy children, that like good things are happening to me now, there is a sort of trauma-informed part of me that is a little bit afraid that if I let my guard down, all of these like bad things will come swooping in to take away everything that I love. And I have to like also relinquish that story, which is a story that has been born from justified paranoia and fear. And instead just sit in the place of like, this is good. And whatever happens next, that is also good. Like, I am going to be okay. And that's where that sitting in silence and just like observing yourself and feeling the interconnectedness of everything gives you that sense of peace, with that knowledge of the abyss that can never go away.
The one thing I wanted to ask you about, and I remember thinking about it at the time, and then it's reflected in your book, is the profound love of your family. Your birth family, not the family that you would come to build on your own. There's a detail in the book where you talk about only getting 6 hours of visitation a month. And despite being from Seattle, you know, very far away from Italy, someone from your family was always there.
Yep.
And the way you talked about your mom in this as sort of like being your net that has caught you. Don't you feel that endures?
Yes. I mean, especially becoming a mother myself and knowing what it feels like to love something so much more than I could ever love myself. Like, that knowledge that exists and that is real is deeply, deeply comforting to me. And it is deeply empowering to me too, because I know that it is within me to pass on, to like give that to someone else. And like, what an incredible gift that all of us are capable of giving to each other all the time. and so yes, I think that you're right. And I think this is one of the ways that I am an incredibly lucky person, is I've never had that love from my family ever be questioned. And I can only hope that other people, like I met many people in prison who did not have that experience, and they were super fucked up by it, like irrevocably damaged by it. And I wonder if that's the main difference between me getting out of this and surviving and thriving versus me being broken by it, is that like deep knowledge of being loved.
Amanda Knox, I could listen to you for hours. We're going to have more conversations. I have like 10 essay ideas out of this conversation, but
let's do it.
You are a force of nature, and I am so grateful to you for taking the time.
Thank you so much, Barry. It's been such a pleasure.